Welcome to the 360 Teaching and Learning Podcast, an all-round look at student-centered education. I'm Adrian Pumphrey, and this week, my co-host Laura Gillen and I talk with Park Tudor's Director of Equity and Inclusion, Camille Wiggins. We discuss her experience at the recent People of Color Conference from NAIS and how it may inform the conversation at Park Tudor in the coming weeks and months. Enjoy the episode. Well, Camille, thank you so much for joining us. Again, it's been a couple of years now since you originally joined us. First of all, how have the last couple of years been for you settling in?
Oh, moving on roller skates, but settling in nonetheless. Park Tudor is very much home. It was home from the very beginning, but just discovering the home slowly in a pandemic kind of way. But it's been great. I've been ecstatic about the journey here so far.
Oh, good. Well, we're here to talk about the People of Color Conference, the NAIS conference that you recently went with a delegation to Texas. Mm-hmm. So we just wanted to check in and hear about the conference. But I think, first of all, would you be able to tell us a little bit about the conference and maybe some of the aims that you think they have in hosting the conference? And could you tell us about it?
This is an opportunity that I learned about coming to Park Tudor. Park Tudor has participated in the People of Color Conference, the Student Diversity Leadership Conference, for as many years as those conferences have existed, which is exciting to know about. And NAIS devised and designed this conference opportunity for professionals in independent schools and for students in independent schools so that we would have a place where we could come together as colleagues, as collaborators, and finding thought partners about areas of equity and diversity. And for students, this has been an opportunity for students of color and students who find themselves allies of students of people of color and students of color in independent schools to build leadership skills and to also find a place to do brainstorming and to discuss the most recent and relevant topics that exist at the time. So it's really an exciting opportunity to just be refilled and re-energized with the work that we're doing as professionals in equity, inclusion, and the belonging space in independent schools, but also then to build relationships with one another across the country. So it's just a wonderful kind of reaffirming opportunity for students and for faculty alike.
That sounds great. I love the idea of the students going with the faculty. I don't know of many other conferences that do that. So mm-hmm. That's how is it sort of interacting and processing with the students as they're going through the experience?
Well, what's interesting is there are literally two conferences going on at the same time. There's the People of Color Conference and then the Student Diversity Leadership Conference. And while we were physically in the convention center for the events and opportunities in the People of Color Conference, the student conference was sort of next door in the adjoining hotel. And so the student delegations have their own student chaperones or faculty-led chaperones. And so students then have a separate path of experiences and opportunities and conversations with a student population. And then the People of Color Conference is happening in another nearby space, but they are definitely different paths. And at the end of the conference, on the final day, that was the time when students were then prepared to have student-led dialogue with their adult chaperone. So that was the time for this cross interaction and collaboration between the People of Color Conference side and the Student Diversity Leadership side as well. But beyond that, they're actually different paths and different opportunities and experiences for students. Quite frankly, they have a talent show. On the People of Color Conference side, there was no talent show.
But there could have been.
There could have been, but there was a choir. And so there are interesting and unique experiences that adults and students can have at the same time in near places, but different. So it's kind of an extraordinary undertaking for NAIS to host both an adult and student conference at the same time. And similarly for school participants, some schools bring a delegation of students, some schools don't. This year, we took a delegation of 16 adult professionals and for students. So nonetheless, we were a really enthusiastic and vibrant group, having really fun experiences and really rewarding experiences from an educational and professional standpoint as well.
And then of those 16, is that from lower school to upper school faculty and staff?
It's a cross section. So we had a little bit of everyone, I think. Faculty, staff, administrators participated. They were a part of that 16 from all of our divisions. And I really believe we did a great job this time of representing our entire campus. What's really unique about this particular year, this is, I think, the 35th year for the People of Color Conference, and we've been going for 35 years, and then it's the 25th year for the Student Diversity Leadership Conference. We've been going the entire time as well, and this was the inaugural year for the Heads Summit, meaning there was another track added for heads of school who are people of color. And this, of course, is, well, maybe all don't know, but for the past 2 years, this conference has taken place virtually. And only the People of Color Conference took place virtually. They didn't have a student conference. But because of the pandemic and because of our inability to meet in large spaces together, they hosted the conference online. So this year represented the first time in 3 years that we'd all been back. We've had the ability to be together. And so our delegation, our team, so to speak, was larger, I think, than it would have been or has been in past years. But it also represented an opportunity for professional development that didn't happen for the past couple of years. And so we were just delighted and grateful for Park Tudor and our administration for recognizing the need to allow greater limits or the expansion of limits in terms of the numbers of folks who were just really desirous of additional professional development that we'd gone without for so many years. So that's why our group was a little bit larger. And I think in future years, we'll still have a great representation from our population. But again, I hope we continue to achieve the same cross-section of individuals from our divisions, our staff, and our faculty, and our student body as well.
What are some of the either the takeaways that you feel like teachers took away from the conference that they could bring to their classrooms, or some of the administrators could bring to their important work? Because it's professional development. So how might you describe how they're being professionally developed by attending the conference?
I think there's an extraordinary takeaway for teachers to examine and remain mindful of the population of students that are before them, and understanding that there are a variety of needs that exist for the student population, and that those needs are changing and have changed, particularly because of the introduction or the event of the pandemic. But I think that faculty found many opportunities to reconnect with the broader vision of being available to the student population and the needs of the student population, and particularly students of color in independent schools who have unique experiences, not so unique that they are just simply dissimilar from other students in independent schools, but nonetheless, I think faculty are able to tap into some of those relevant issues. And then from an administrative or staff perspective, those individuals can tap into the bigger picture and the 30,000 or the 50,000 foot view of what it's like in independent schools and the pressing issues or the pressing concerns of those communities today, and also how staff and administrators show up in those environments, and how some of the needs have changed over the years from an organizational, from an administrative standpoint. If you're thinking of staffing needs, if you're thinking of the relevance of topics that may not have been discussed even 3 or 4 years ago, how we are now discussing those topics like mental health. We talk more openly and more frequently about issues of mental health, and what does that look like when you're talking about maintaining your teaching population or your administrator population, or even if you're talking about diversifying your population. So I think there are lots of takeaways, but I think those are some of the biggest takeaways that were just easily attainable during the conference.
I wondered, from your own personal experience, what was some of the sessions that maybe stood out to you, or some of the tracks that were interesting to you?
Wow, there were so many. So I came equipped, and I kind of I did a little studying before this particular conversation to remind myself. Each day you could either access the information like your conference program or agenda through your phone for all the fancy young'uns that were there. But I had to find the cardboard pieces of paper every day so I could open them up and read for myself what the offerings were. But there were probably over 150 different workshops that you could participate in or attend during the 3 days of the conference. And so I was fortunate that I picked really well, or might find my way to poke my head in a couple of workshops. So I went to an extraordinary workshop on code switching. And code switching is just a term and a phenomenon. We all experience it in a variety of ways, not just people of color, but we do code switching. For example, you come to work and you talk amongst your colleagues and students in a certain way, but then you go home and maybe it's a little bit more casual, or you use a different vernacular. That's code switching. And so the code switching workshop was wildly popular. And by the time I got to that particular workshop location, the room was at capacity. And the popularity and the nature of code switching, particularly for people of color in independent schools, because that phenomenon is really prevalent. The overflow of that particular workshop was into the hallway. And this was an occasion where people in the hallway, of which I was one, were beckoning inside the room. Please repeat the question. Please remember there are people in the hallway. And this was one of those workshops where people did not choose a different session. They just decided to stay in the hallway and just ask the person in front, what did he say again? What did they say again? And what are they laughing about now? I mean, it was just this really kind of interesting call and response. So the code switching session was really great. I also attended a session that talked about the intersection between the equity and inclusion space and counseling in independent schools, and how that intersection, that Venn diagram of experience, is actually growing as well. I also attended a session on affinity group resistance, and how the discussion of affinity groups and basically the other discussion about the need or the necessity for affinity groups is prevalent across independent schools as well. And that was an extraordinary, well-presented discussion about the need for affinity groups and how we need to take a closer look from the start to talk about what affinity groups really, really look like, because sometimes we operate in affinity groups and we haven't really acknowledged that, oh yeah, that is an affinity group as well. It's just that there's another affinity group that I have more questions about, and why is that one different from mine? So that was a very good session to attend as well. So that's just a really good cross-section of those particular sessions I got to. So
that's great. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
And then with the students coming back, what's some of the feedback that you've gotten from the students about how their conference went?
Well, that's a really great question, because I learned feedback not just from the students, but I've had an occasion to talk with their family as well, just by happenstance, just by running into them on campus. And so student reflections interestingly align with the student reflections that I'd heard from other students that had participated in the past, and even other adults who talked about what they recalled other students saying about their experience. And one of them was, oh my gosh, I made lifelong friends. Oh my goodness, I found so many people that are having similar experiences, and then the asterisk, and I'm still friends with these people today, sort of thing. And so the students our students who participated this year talked about that very thing, that they were able to really create great connections and bonds with students that they just met for the first time, and created a broader community, and experienced a great sense of family while they were there, because they found people who had shared experiences as well. And then when running into their parents, their families were just grateful. They were just grateful that their student had an opportunity to participate in such an event. And they were grateful to Park Tudor for, providing the support for this endeavor. And they were just grateful, recognizing that there was something about their student that had changed for the good upon their return, and that they're just different now. And there's a spark now. We took students who had great sparks before, but then when they came back, their families reflected upon how they're just the better for this experience. So I'm in awe of the student reflection, because I think it's extraordinary to be able to participate in something at such a young age. You can call this professional development for a child, for a student. And those are just really precious opportunities that not every student, not every person gets. It's really, when you're much older, then you avail yourself of, highfalutin professional opportunities, right? But as a student, this is a one-of-a-kind experience. So I'm glad our students had the reflections that we expected and hoped that they would have.
That's amazing. I was wondering, coming back to PT at this point, just thinking about what is the follow-up conversation to this conference, and what do you think what sort of conversations are being had with the delegates, as much as you're able to share, in terms of where we go next, after you're processing your experience?
Mm-hmm. And that processing is still occurring as well. I'm still looking at the notes on my desk, just notes that I wrote down and things that have come to me even later. And from finding other colleagues in the hallways, or running, our paths crossing, and then saying, oh yeah, I remember that one thing that we need to, touch base on as well. But there are several things. I think as we continue to configure our clubs and organizations as it relates to affinity groups, what we're doing there, and POCC, SDLC, I think they're great opportunities for us to come home with ideas, templates, resources, contact information, lots of different ways where we can support and bolster the efforts that are currently underway here at Park Tudor. So I think that we'll find great ways to reinforce our efforts as it relates to how our clubs and organizations are structured and how they're supported. And I think that we'll have a different lens to begin to identify needs in a different way. And so there's some affirmation in that, because you can go along for a while and think that you're getting it right, and it feels comfortable and it feels good because you don't feel bad, and you don't feel like there's anything wrong. And having an opportunity to kind of figure out whether or not you're in alignment or not in a conference-like setting, where the intention is that people should experience growth and people should experience a stretch of their thoughts and imaginations and their planning, then hopefully you can come back home and then begin to put those things in use. So I think that will happen in our clubs and organizations. I also think that as we look at just ordinary operations of an independent school, if it has to do with recruiting, if it has to do with leadership and professional opportunities, then it's helpful to know that there are other schools and colleagues across the country who are experiencing some of the same challenges with recruitment, or with maybe some administrative changes and things like that. So I think that we'll begin to have a fresh perspective and maybe some fresh ideas about some of the ways we can continue to grow and fortify the great work we're doing here at Park Tudor.
I love that idea of using the conference as a way to kind of check the calibration of what we're doing as a school or as a classroom teacher. Because that conference, it does, I attended, I think maybe 10 years ago. But I remember it holds up a mirror, teaches you to really lean in to the discomfort in the hopes of growth and with the intent of growth.
Right.
And so to have that moment to sort of raise your own awareness, and then to kind of check the calibration, kind of, are you ringing true here? So important, so great that you guys are able to go and do that.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to know that there are others on the journey, in the mission, in the trenches. So you're right. It's a really good space to be in.
Well, I think we've got time for maybe one more question, but I just you've mentioned some of the conversations that's being had at this point. I would love to know about some of the questions that we're asking moving forward. So what are the questions that both delegates of the conference will be asking at this point moving forward, do you think? And what are some questions that we as members of the Park Tudor community that didn't go to the conference, what questions should we be asking as a follow-up to this experience?
That's a good question. I think that even the title of the conference helps me begin an answer to that. And the title of the conference this year was Reunited in Purpose, Elevating Our Worth, Our Agency, and Our Excellence. And I think for both participants and members of the Park Tudor community alike, I think that if we begin to anchor our efforts around those three words, our worth, our agency, and our excellence, I think that we're on the right path. Because I think that those three words give us a certain charge, and they give us a certain motivation to just continuing, as I mentioned before, to do the great work that we're already doing here at Park Tudor. But how can we do it better? How can we increase our worth? How can we increase our agency and our excellence? And as it relates to people of color, I think that this is an additional call to our purpose, maybe the meaning of our existence in an independent school, because we may be in an office of one, on a team of one, in a community of one. There may be just one of me in a particular organization, but to be in an affirming space and to come home and to come back and reflect upon the words of worth and excellence and agency, that keeps that spark and that fire alive. And I think that motivation will help us just do all kinds of great things. So I don't know if I necessarily have a list of questions, but I do think that as we continue to think about putting words into action, taking the notes, looking at the takeaways from the different workshops and experiences, and even the plenary sessions. And I just have to add, some of the plenary speakers were just extraordinary. And being in the presence of Nikki Giovanni is just a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity just to hear spoken word in such an extraordinary fashion. But I think that the reminders about our worth and our excellence and our agency those reminders won't go away for a long time coming. And so reflecting upon whatever workshops you attended, whatever plenary sessions you attended, whatever interactions you may have had, even with your fellow collaborators from the Park Tudor delegation, or folks that you may have met while there, I'm still energized by the opportunities that exist for us to do far more in terms of building a community at Park Tudor where everyone feels respected, everyone feels like they belong, everyone has an opportunity and has a voice that's audible and has a voice that's meaningful and impactful, because our agency and our worth and our excellence isn't an individual pursuit. It's actually a collective pursuit. But I believe that we all have a certain amount of ownership individually that helps us weave collectively into our communities where we just end up stronger and better. So I hope that's an answer to a question that allows us to use it as a platform to do far more.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Camille. It's been great to hear your thoughts on the conference, and thank you for all you do here.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Camille.
The 360 Teaching and Learning podcast is produced by Park Tudor School. To listen to previous episodes of the 360 Teaching and Learning podcast, head to 360podcast.org or subscribe by searching for 360 Teaching and Learning wherever you get your podcasts.